Good morning, everyone. I'm Errol Barnett, in for Vladimir Duthier, who continues his assignment in Florida. As you see around me, we're watching all the news happening across the country and around the world right now. Here's a quick look at top stories we're tracking for you as you get your day underway. Relief crews arrive in Florida, where millions of homes and businesses remain without power following Hurricane Milton. We are on the ground with the latest on the cleanup and recovery efforts. A dozen tourists rescued from an underground mine in Colorado after being trapped for several hours. We'll bring you the latest on what officials are saying unfolded. And fresh new economic data shows wholesale prices were flat last month. What this means for your wallet and the potential of more interest rate cuts. This is CBS News 24/7. We begin with just this massive devastation. The images still stun me, coming to us from Florida after Hurricane Milton made landfall yesterday. Emergency crews discovered neighborhoods still underwater. We know at least 16 people were killed. First responders continue to make an incredible effort to reach those trapped by the storm, and hundreds have been rescued so far. And the storm made landfall Wednesday evening into Thursday. But let's now start with CBS News correspondent Jonathan Vigliotti. Jonathan, you wrote out this storm. You're looking at the recovery efforts. What are the greatest needs for people there right now?
Yeah, and Errol, good morning to you. We're actually here in downtown St. Petersburg. Power is going to be one of the biggest issues. We'll get to that in just a second because we actually hope to get an update on some of those needs by Governor DeSantis, who's expected to speak behind us in about an hour or so. He himself has been in this area surveying the damage. The backdrop for him is going to be the scene of a massive crane collapse. What you're looking at here is an 8-story tall piece of the frame of this crane, which crashed into this building, home to the Tampa Bay Times, shredding at least the top 3 stories of it. It puts into perspective just how strong the wind gusts were here, 105 miles per hour at time. That crane actually coming from a condo building site, what will be the largest building on the west coast of the state when all is said and done. We were actually here yesterday. We've now been taped back away from this area because there is some concern about some of the other cranes and the condition that they are in as the inspections continue. We have seen a lot of wind damage and a lot of rain issues, flooding particularly as we have surveyed the area. A lot of down trees, a lot of down power lines, as I mentioned, and a lot of flash flooding. One of the biggest issues for first responders getting to those people that were cut off by water. We were actually in the Clearwater area yesterday, Errol, and you may remember this from our reporting. We were watching as a massive rescue operation was underway. Hundreds of people chose to ride out the storm in a low-lying area under evacuation in this apartment complex, and they had to be rescued by hundreds of first responders who moved in with high water vehicles and boats to rescue them. We spoke with a number of them saying they thought the worst of the storm was over after the wind had left, but then at 2 a.m. the water started rising up to their necks in some cases, people wading in water for hours until help arrived. You now have rescue crews continuing those operations. From what we understand, at least 1,000 people have been rescued. We don't know all of their conditions. As those operations continue, power outages. Supplying and restoring power, a big issue. 50,000 linemen were brought in ahead of the storm. They are here from all over the country. Nearly 3 million people across the state without power, and officials here warning it could take several more weeks for some. Of course, we'll get that update when the governor addresses us in about an hour's time from now, Errol.
Yeah, that's right, Jonathan. And people in the less populated areas, they've got 2 million people at least without power. There still may be more numbers of people who need help that we just don't realize yet. We will, of course, check back in with you. We really appreciate you being out there and this update as well. Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Tammy Souza with the first look at the national forecast. Tammy?
Well, Errol, you know what? There is some good news in Florida. It looks like things are going to be quiet. I'm going to pull out and show you the continental United States map, and you can take a look. Florida right now is rain-free, in fact, even cloud-free. So that's going to give them a chance to really start to clean things up. Having been down there, for a week with my family, I can tell you they need to have that good weather. That is critically important. Let's take a look at what's going on right now, because Milton is now nothing but a remnant low, and it is moving out into the Atlantic. It will be gone. It is not going to bother the United States again. We also have Leslie, which is a tropical storm out in the Atlantic. It is going to curve off to the north and the east, not to bother the United States at all. And then we'll keep an eye on this area of low pressure that is going to be coming off of the African coast. It's already an invest, and we'll watch where this goes as it moves across the Atlantic Ocean. So right now, the good news is much of Florida is pretty quiet. There are just some typical showers that are trying to move on the East Coast, but that's about it. We'll talk more about this and those incredible tornadoes, all that flooding and all that wind when I come back in a few minutes. Errol?
All right, Tammy, we appreciate that. We will see you soon. President Biden is calling on Congress to speed up emergency funds now for the victims of Hurricane Helene and Milton. Let's bring in senior CBS News, White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe. Ed, what's notable to me watching the president speak is that he was very blunt when speaking about Trump yesterday. I'll get to that in just a moment, but any chance he may try to get Congress back in session before Election Day to get more money for emergency relief?
No, while he's publicly calling for him, I checked again this morning here at the White House. There are no plans for him to formally call on the speaker to bring them back or for them to talk about this, in part because I think just the public pressure alone is what the White House is sort of suggesting, that they're doing their jobs. In essence, if Congress would like to come back and try to start tackling this, they can. Here's the thing, though. We've heard Republican leadership up on Capitol Hill suggest, while what's happened is bad, is complicated, and is going to be really expensive, it's going to take several more weeks potentially for the full calculations of what exactly is needed, and to watch the disaster relief fund and related FEMA accounts get drained by these two accounts. So while you may hear federal officials saying we're not going to have enough money to pay for all this, currently, you're right, you're going to run out of money that's there right now. I don't think there's any question that at some point in the next few weeks, few months, by the end of this year, there's going to be conversation about how to replenish FEMA's accounts. But it's not like they're going to lose the billions that they have here in the next few days. It'll take several weeks, if not months, for that money to go out. And that's part of why Republicans are insisting they don't have to come back right now to address this. One other thing to watch will be how, especially Republicans, tackle the criticisms, much of it driven by falsehoods, about how exactly FEMA spends its money, who gets it, whether you get to keep it. And the mistruths that have been talked about, like FEMA seizing property or other things like that, all that untrue. But there are some concerns about exactly how it doles out money and allocates for various disasters. And so let's see if that becomes part of the debate whenever it begins. But again, at this point, not expected until after Election Day.
And on that point, Ed, it was notable when the president was speaking yesterday and his scripted remarks, and when he was pushed for more clarification from reporters, that he is being more blunt in criticizing former President Trump for spreading misinformation. To me, it sounded like a guy not running for re-election, right? He feels like the guardrails are off. But I'm just wondering, from your point of view, how you interpreted that.
I don't think... well, the White House would essentially say we don't really have a choice but to call out the fact that it's all rooted from stuff he started. And there's a political benefit, obviously, to calling this out and being explicit about it, because Democrats want to hear the president blame his predecessor for spreading this. But it's also a signal to those in the storm field that if you're concerned about this, or if you're being led to believe this, it's rooted in former President Trump spreading these lies. And so they want to call that out now. And it also puts some Republicans who are up for re-election or who represent these areas of the state in a squeeze. And we've seen some of them have to go out and fact-check these claims and make clear that they're false. So he's, and he's just personally frustrated by not only this, but of course all these years of mistruth spread by Trump about the Biden administration, about the president and his family more directly. So yes, not running for re-election, a little more free to speak out, and apparently quite willing to do so. Errol.
Yeah, and on a topic like this, that misinformation can put lives at risk. Ed O'Keefe,
Precisely.
Great to see you. Thanks for joining us. We turn our focus now to the Middle East. Israelis are preparing to mark Yom Kippur, over a year since Hamas launched its deadly October 7th attacks. and there appears to be no letting up in the fighting. Officials in Lebanon say at least 22 people have been killed, over 100 others injured in Israeli strikes over the heart of Beirut. This is the aftermath. Last night, the Hezbollah militant group launched more projectiles into Israel. Our Deborah Pata brings us more from Beirut.
2 strikes overnight deep in the heart of the capital, the deadliest attack since Israel began hitting central Beirut last month. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has threatened the devastation seen in Gaza on Lebanon if its people do not stand up to Iranian-backed Hezbollah militants. Israel is waging its offensive against Hezbollah along the border, now in Beirut and the Bekaa Valley. We visited the village of Hodor, where war came without warning. Local villagers told us that the area is repeatedly under fire and that they go to bed every night in fear. Just this week, 5 people were killed in a strike there, including a much-loved school teacher and his grandson. Over the past month, 23 people have died in more than 30 airstrikes in this village alone. Now, Israel says it is targeting Hezbollah strongholds in this area, but the villagers of Hodor we spoke to say they have nothing to do with this fight. Errol?
Deborah Pata, thank you. We now want to move our focus to Colorado. Get this, officials there, they're still trying to determine what caused a deadly accident on what is usually a tourist attraction. It took emergency crews about 7 hours to save a dozen people trapped in this gold mine. 1 person did die in the accident. CBS News correspondent Carter Evans brings us the latest on this daring rescue. Carter, help us understand what this place is all about and how this unfolded.
Well, when you look all around behind me, this is all an active gold mine in those mountains. But directly behind me here, that is the mine shaft down to this underground gold mine. It's about 100 years old, more than 100 years old, in fact. But the gold mine here is no longer active. It's simply a tourist attraction. It's been run by the same family for the last 50 years. You see that white tower behind me there? That is the lift. That is where people get in these tiny little cages, about 4 people in each one, and they're stacked on top of each other, and they go down 1,000 feet underground, where they get a tour of the mine and how these miners used to work. Well, what happened? There was a problem with one of these elevators yesterday, and it's not clear exactly what that problem was, but some people got stuck at around 500 feet deep underground. And yes, as you mentioned, 1 person died, and we have no information about who that person was or how that happened. We know a couple other people were injured, and then they brought in rescue teams and experts to take a look at this lift and make sure it was okay to bring everyone else up, and they did that last night.
Just trying to put myself in the position of those tourists being trapped in this mine. You're waiting for something to happen. We don't know how the person passed away. I would imagine panic attacks would be very available to everybody there. Help us understand the scale of the rescue mission, because I understand it also took hours to get everybody out.
Yeah, well, I think the main thing is that they wanted to make sure this lift was safe. And if it wasn't, they were going to send ropes down there and hoist people up. And they really didn't want to do that because they were 1,000 feet underground. So they wanted to make sure they could get them up in this lift. And that is ultimately what ended up happening. But I do understand that they somewhat kept the folks who were stuck in the mine in the dark as to what had happened in terms of injuries and deaths. They did not want them to panic while they were down there. So once they got up, once they were rescued, that's when they were told what happened to the other group.
Just incredible, and our appreciation to those rescue crews. Carter Evans, thanks very much. Sean Diddy Combs' sex trafficking trial date is now set next when the music mogul is due in court, and the severity of the charges he faces. We'll be right back. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Sean Diddy Combs was back in a New York courtroom where he learned his sex trafficking and racketeering trial will begin in May. He's pleaded not guilty to all the charges. Lilia Luciano joins us now. Lilia, what more can you tell us about this case?
Hey there, Errol. Well, I'll tell you that yesterday in court, Sean Diddy Combs showed up smiling. His whole, well, not his whole family, his children, all of his children and his mother who traveled from Florida were there. Oftentimes he would turn around and look at them at the end of the hearing. He was blowing kisses at them and saying thank you. He was comforted by his attorneys. It was odd to see him smile so much. It seemed like he was optimistic, and many of us were wondering whether he would be bailed out. But there is still a bail appeal pending in his case after a judge had rejected a $50 million bail package. What you're seeing there are images of his children who showed up to support him. As you said, the trial is now set to begin in May. We expect that it's going to take longer than a month, as the prosecution said that they will take around 3 weeks just to lay out their case. What we heard from his attorneys also yesterday is, in part, what they're fighting is to get a gag order because they allege that some of the federal agents who were involved in the case had leaked information to the media. And what they're addressing specifically is that video that you might remember from a hotel room where he is seen attacking Cassie, his ex and singer. That piece of evidence is, of course, going to be crucial and something that everybody, I mean, the public has already laid their eyes on, and that the prosecution considers is an essential piece of evidence. The defense is saying that because agents allegedly leaked this video to CNN, that there should be a gag order in place. The video is, of course, expected to be something that the jurors will see. But then the prosecution is saying, look, nobody in our prosecutorial team has leaked any information or spoken to the media. On the contrary, it is the defense's team that has been making very concerning statements to media, including an interview that the lead attorney, the defense attorney, made with TMZ, alleging that this case involves racism. And so both sides were yesterday agreeing there's going to be no communication with media. So that they are going to abide by the rules of the case, where they can't present any evidence to the public or make any kinds of statements like the ones that have been made. So yesterday was not so eventful in terms that he wasn't bailed, but we now have a date where the case will begin, the trial will begin, and that's May 5th. Errol?
Yeah, and that video was so key, Lilia, because if you remember during the Cassie lawsuit, Diddy denied he did anything. It was only after that video was released that he himself released a video saying, that's not me, that's a monster, I've changed. And so it was a real changing point in the public's perception. We really appreciate you walking us through that. We know you will have more as this unfolds. Lilia, thank you.
Thanks, Errol.
The corruption scandal here in New York City, it's expanding across City Hall. You have more key players of Mayor Eric Adams' administration facing scrutiny and investigation. It now includes the new police commissioner who took over after the former top cop resigned amid his own scandal. The mayor is vowing to stay in office after pleading not guilty to federal charges. CBS News New York's Christina Fan has more on this.
Good morning. The Adams administration just keeps taking on more water. In addition to the numerous resignations and vacancies that have to be filled, we are learning more about a fifth investigation into possible corruption. This one is being led by Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg and the City Department of Investigation. Sources say it involves the city's leasing of commercial properties and a number of public officials, including Ingrid Lewis Martin, the mayor's chief advisor, who has been a close confidant of his for decades. Prosecutors seized her phone a few weeks ago and also searched her home when she returned home from a trip to Japan with a broker involved in city leases who is involved in the very same probe. There was also a development Thursday in a different corruption investigation, this one focusing on Terrence Banks, the brother of outgoing schools chancellor David Banks. According to the New York Times, federal agents searched the offices of the police department's school safety division, looking into a possible bribery scheme involving Banks's consulting firm and city contracts. On top of all of this, Mayor Adams is still trying to name a permanent replacement to replace his embattled interim police commissioner Tom Donlin, who was also the subject of an FBI search just 9 days after he was named to that position. Reporting from City Hall, Christina Fan, CBS News, New York.
All right, Christina, thanks for that. Now, as hurricane relief efforts continue, so much misinformation is being spread about funds that are available to people. One false claim is that funds allocated to help care for migrants is being diverted from disaster aid. Well, our Camilo Montoya Galvez fact-checked that claim with the head of Customs and Border Protection, Troy Miller. Listen to what he had to say.
Shelter and Services Program is authorized, independently funded by Congress. It has nothing to do with the disaster relief funds.
Okay, and you are not diverting any funds toward that program from disaster aid?
None.
Okay.
All right, well done, Camilo. CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camilo Montoya Galvez joins us now. Help us understand more of what you were told there. How is emergency relief money allocated?
Hi, Earl. Good morning. Despite claims by former President Donald Trump and some of his Republican allies, the Biden administration right now, as we speak, is not diverting any federal disaster relief funds towards migrant processing and migrant care. There is a joint Customs and Border Protection and FEMA program allocated and authorized by Congress, as you just heard the commissioner talk about, that allows the federal government, Errol, to reimburse organizations in jurisdictions that are housing, feeding, and otherwise assisting migrants released from federal custody. But that is a separate pool of funding allocated by Congress, again, that is distinct from the federal disaster funding that Congress also authorizes and allocates. And that pool of money that goes towards migrant processing and assistance, Errol, has been appropriated by Congress since fiscal year 2019 under the Trump administration, and no money is being diverted towards that program from disaster aid, according to FEMA and the acting CBP commissioner. But we do have to underscore, Errol, that in fiscal year 2019, during the Trump administration, there was an effort to divert federal FEMA disaster aid money towards immigration enforcement. The Trump administration at the time notified Congress that it would divert FEMA disaster relief aid towards building and constructing federal facilities along the U.S.-Mexico border to hear the asylum claims of migrants processed under the so-called Remain in Mexico program. So it is really important, Errol, to set the record straight here.
Very interesting, Camilo. Your clarification is so important. And if I'm hearing what you're saying is right, during the Trump administration, disaster money was diverted to build a wall. During the Biden administration, disaster money is not being diverted. And viewers can check how Congress spends its money themselves. There are receipts. Camilo Montoya Galvez, we appreciate your time today. Thank you. Now, with former President Donald Trump busy taking shots at FEMA, former President Obama now kicking off a campaign blitz for the Harris-Walz campaign. Hear his warning to a potential critical group of voters in a vital swing state. This is CBS News 24/7. A warm welcome back to CBS News 24/7. Here's a quick look at some top stories we're following for you right now. On the West Coast, the northbound lanes of I-5, that's in Los Angeles, were closed down after a fatal shooting and vehicle collision. One person died and another was sent to hospital. Authorities say they're looking for 3 potential suspects. The motive for the shootings is not yet clear. Let's get you to Idaho now, where the trial of Bryan Kohberger has been delayed until August of 2025. He is accused of killing 4 University of Idaho students back in 2022. Next month, there will be a hearing on the motions challenging a potential death sentence. That's if Kohberger is convicted. A judge entered pleas of not guilty on Kohberger's behalf when he remained silent during his plea hearing. And we want to show you this video. The Coast Guard rescuing folks off the coast of Florida. A boat captain was found hanging onto a cooler. This is about 30 miles offshore in the Gulf. And this individual was riding out Hurricane Milton overnight. The Coast Guard estimates that he endured over 75-mile-per-hour winds and around 20-foot seas while waiting to be rescued. Just incredible. He was taken to a Tampa hospital for treatment. Now, we continue our coverage of the aftermath of Hurricane Milton. You can still see amazing aerials that we're getting into our newsroom. Now, we know the storm killed at least 16 people in Florida. That number is expected to rise. Hundreds, though, have been rescued, but others do remain missing. Let's check back with CBS News correspondent Jonathan Vigliotti. Jonathan, we know we're standing by to hear the governor speak where you are, but what's the latest as far as at least time frame to rescue people who are missing?
Yeah, good morning to you, Errol. Those rescues continue. We don't know the time frame at this point. We do know that at least 1,000 people across the state have been rescued by a team of thousands of first responders, and we know that those rescues do continue this morning. When it comes to power, you have nearly 3 million people across the state without power, officials saying it could take several weeks to restore that power. Then you have the damage alone from homes and rebuilding. We're talking a time frame of possibly years. If you look back to just Hurricane Ian 2 years ago, the Fort Myers Beach community is still in the process of rebuilding. We hope to get an update when the governor does address us in about 30 minutes. One of the questions I will be asking is if it even makes sense for some of these low-lying communities that have been hardest hit to rebuild. You're talking about places that have been now hit by 2 hurricanes in 2 weeks' time, Milton now, and then Hurricane Helene just 2 weeks ago. We're at a location, the backdrop for the governor will be a massive crane collapse. You can see the piece here that crashed into an 8-story building. The top 3 stories have been shredded. This is the Tampa Bay Times building. This crane blown over by 105 mile-per-hour winds coming from a construction site on a condo, what will be the largest building here on the west coast of the state. Again, power, one of the big issues. We've been surveying the damage. It makes sense that the power is out in so many areas. A lot of down trees, a lot of down power lines, and a lot of flash flooding, and a lot of rescues still continuing from our understanding. Again, we hope to get an update in just a few minutes' time, Errol.
Yeah, Jonathan, of course, we'll bring that to our viewers live. But you make a great point about the wisdom of rebuilding. We were speaking with a disaster recovery advocate at 7 a.m. on CBS Morning News, and they said you can do it, but the structures need to be able to withstand the changing climate and withstand these powerful storms. We'll see you again very soon. Thank you for that report. We want to cross back now to CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Tammy Souza. And Tammy, you mentioned that you're personally affected by this. Your home in Reddington Beach impacted by the storm. I'm sorry that this is happening to you, but please share with our viewers what you're experiencing.
I am just one of thousands, and I cannot complain. Nobody died. There are so many people who are without. I'm going to start off. This is Helene. Now, this is the night that Helene came in. That was the 26th. This is the driveway. I have Ring cameras watching. Watch that truck over there. This is what happened an hour later. We already had water coming in, 5 feet of water into our house. This came in very, very quickly. Behind the house is the water. So we had the streets fill, and we had it come in from the backyard as well. Now, this is the kitchen. At some point, it came up above the kitchen counters, and then it came up above the bar counter. So everything was destroyed. What people have to know is when this happens, this is nasty salt water. The sewage mixes in with this, and it takes about 8 hours for this to drain out. So the result is this. Everybody has to tear everything out. I spent a week tearing every single item out of the house, kitchens, bathrooms, bedrooms, everything you own out onto the street. And there are miles and miles from Clearwater down to Siesta Key of all of this. And it did not get picked up in time. There's a picture of me standing in the driveway with the dump trailers, and there is the pile beginning to build in the middle of our street because everybody flooded. And this is the result. This is kind of what's left of our house. It is stripped down to the studs. It's been disinfected. And what we will do, if we have the chance, is lift it so we never have to go through this again. We had never flooded before this. We also had a number of houses. This is a good thing for everybody to know. They caught fire. Why'd they catch fire? Electric vehicles in the garage, huge houses that burned down. And along the beautiful beaches of Pinellas County, these were seawalls of all those giant houses that sit on the beach. They were undermined. The sand is gone, and now the waves are lapping up against that. So it could be a tragedy. Now let's go over to Milton. The impacts, rare supercell type tornadoes. These are the kind you get in Oklahoma and Texas, not with landfalling hurricanes. We had dozens of these. We've seen the damage. They were deadly, and a record 125 warnings in one day for Florida. Now, the wind and the rain up to 109-mile-an-hour gusts. We had a 100-mile gust at our house in Pinellas County. That's where St. Petersburg is located. A record 19-plus inches of rain in the Tampa area. That breaks the record for the monthly record of rain. So that is an incredible amount of rain that fell. That's why that flooding is still ongoing. And the storm surge up to 10 feet from Siesta Key southward. And that is what Milton did. So now you have an idea of both what Helene did and Milton did, two separate storms and catastrophic consequences.
Yeah, Tammy, I know that you say that you're among the lucky, but I just want to thank you for sharing your personal perspective, those images, being vulnerable, and to help us understand what so many people are experiencing. One thing that jumped out at me during our special coverage was that our local reporters and anchors were experiencing this tragedy themselves, but still showing up to work and then even going out and volunteering. And I just thank you for being among the people who are not just experiencing this, but getting to work as a journalist and sharing all of that with us. My sincerest thanks to you.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Tammy. All right, we switch now to bring you the latest on the presidential campaign trail. Vice President Kamala Harris and her team campaigning in Arizona today. CBS News senior White House correspondent Weijia Zhang joins us from Phoenix to give us the latest on this. Weijia, it's a bit of a balancing act for both campaigns between dealing with the seriousness of the aftermath of Helene and Milton, but also, you know, securing voters before Election Day in just a few weeks. So what can we expect?
Errol, you're right. Last night, the vice president, as a candidate for president, held a rally just outside of Phoenix. And then today, she is waking up here, but around 1:15 will participate in a briefing with the president about the efforts after Hurricane Milton. And so she'll be doing that virtually. And we've seen her in recent days participate in various briefings. But of course, both Biden and Harris like to say they can walk and chew gum at the same time. And certainly this is an incredibly important balancing act given how close we are to the election. So after that official briefing as VP, she will be making remarks at a fundraiser before heading back to Washington, D.C. Errol.
Former President Barack Obama also helping the Harris-Walz campaign and specifically targeting black male supporters during a rally in Pittsburgh yesterday. His remarks are getting quite a bit of pickup. What did he say?
That's right. He kicked off a Get Out the Vote tour in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which, of course, could be the most critical battleground state of them all. And he had a very candid conversation before the official rally, making various stops along the way, saying that there are some in the black community, some black men who he suspects are not ready to vote for Harris because she is a woman. And he went on to say that it was women who were out protesting, who were out organizing, who made such an impact in the history of black America, and that now is not the time to hesitate because of that. And so these were very powerful remarks, Errol, and the context is also so fascinating. He, of course, was the first black president of this country. Now he's appealing to black voters to vote for who could be the first black woman president. And so he'll be out on the trail as well, former President Bill Clinton this weekend in Georgia, trying to appeal to rural voters in the South.
Yeah, this really feels like the home stretch. I know we have a few weeks to go. Weijia Zhang, great to see you. Thank you very much. Meantime, Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump will head to Colorado and Nevada later today. CBS News campaign reporter Olivia Rinaldi is in Denver. I'm heading this way. Olivia, what can we expect from former President Trump? I know that Aurora is a kind of suburb of Denver, and he's been critical of its crime rate. What are you seeing?
Yeah, good morning, Errol. The central message today is going to be immigration. You mentioned Aurora, and it's a suburb of Denver that Donald Trump has really deputized as the central part of his immigration messaging. So we heard this several weeks ago during the presidential debate, Trump talking about Aurora, Colorado, and Venezuelan gangs that have taken over apartment buildings here. And he's made that central throughout this campaign, talking about the flow of migrants taking over cities like the one you see behind me. But it's important to know he's coming to Aurora Aurora today to have a messaging event about immigration, but the Republican mayor yesterday kind of disputing some of these arguments that the Trump campaign is making, saying that Aurora is a relatively safe city, that some of this gang activity is really limited to just a few apartment buildings, and that for a city of about 400,000 people, it is safe and people enjoy living here, and that this is just these issues are really relegated to just a small area. So we'll be watching that today to see whether or not Trump really seizes on any of those comments or any of those disputes. But it really just goes to show that in these final weeks leading up to the campaign, Trump is not in battleground Michigan or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania today. He will be heading to Nevada later, but he's in Colorado, which is a reliably blue state, and he's here to bring his messaging on immigration. So a little bit of a change than you're seeing from the Harris campaign, but the Trump campaign is really betting that immigration and focusing on that, riling up these voters out here about that, is going to help him in the long run.
All right, Olivia Rinaldi, thank you so much, joining us from Denver. Some fresh new economic data is out this morning. Wholesale prices were unchanged last month. I don't know what that means. What does it mean for your wallet? We will explain after the break. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. All right, there's some fresh data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it shows the Producer Price Index, PPI, was flat in September. Dow Jones economists predicted a 0.1% increase. CBS News contributor J.D. Durkin joins me now with more on this. Heading into the break, J.D., I admitted I don't really know what this means as far as our wallets. I will never act smarter than you on these topics, so help us understand what this data means for what we purchase.
Errol, in the simplest terms possible, we get consumer price index. We got those figures yesterday. That's the measure of inflation on all the things in the economy, Errol, that you and I directly spend money on. That's consumer prices. What's the inflation for eggs and apples and so forth? But wholesale prices, PPI, is the measure of inflation for the companies we're buying from. So think about a company like Home Depot. How much money is Home Depot paying year after year for the lumber that they need in order to sell to us? And it gives us a gauge about how much these corporations and companies are paying, that they might end up kind of pushing those costs down to consumers. So a bit of a mixed bag between yesterday's consumer inflation print and today's wholesale inflation print. Overall, I think right now what we're watching is the stock market react to the ongoing potential soft landing scenario. Errol, as you and I are having this conversation, we're right about at all-time highs for the S&P 500 and a comparable story for the Dow Jones Industrials as well. I think the soft landing scenario has been reinforced by the central bank. I spoke with one economist who told me the fact that the CPI inflation print yesterday was a little bit hotter than expected, not a big deal, but if we continue to go into November, December, into early 2025 and still see that some parts of inflation are a little more stubborn than the Fed would like to see, we can expect the central bank to maybe pause it a little bit on interest rate cuts. But the expectation is still that the Fed will continue to cut interest rates, Errol.
Okay, great. I was going to ask you about that. And I'm glad you mentioned, JD, that just because consumer prices may be up and producer prices may be flat, it doesn't necessarily mean we as the customers will experience those flat prices. Some companies continue to price gouge, according to the Biden administration anyway. But talk to us more about the potential of interest rate cuts and how this and other data factors into it.
Look, the U.S. central bank, Errol, has been very clear for the last few years. They say we are not going to cut interest rates until we feel confident that inflation is close to 2%. It is close to 2%, but it is not quite at 2%. And so we're in a little bit of a wait and see territory. Of course, we're just a few weeks removed here from the central bank taking that massive cut of interest rates at what we call 50 basis points, just a fancy way of saying 0.5% off the federal funds rate. And that is good news, I think, for most Americans, right, who want to see a little bit of relief of pressure. We want to see those borrowing costs come down across the U.S. economy. If you have these credit card bills, you want to see those interest payments come down. So for right now, it's wait and see. Seems as if we're in a good scenario for the Fed to continue those interest rate cuts moving forward. And that means a lot of relief for everyone watching at home.
And that is good news. JD, final few seconds. Anything cool planned for the weekend?
Yes, I'm going home to study more economic data because it's that time of year, Errol.
Thank you, J.D. Durkin. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week. If you looked up at the sky last night, you may have witnessed the northern lights from your own backyard. Next, some of the best views of what was a geomagnetic storm. This is CBS News 24/7. As Florida begins the long recovery from Hurricane Milton, we're learning new details about the last storm to hit the region. Some people living in the path of Hurricane Helene say they did not receive crucial, potentially life-saving warnings to evacuate. CBS News correspondent Tom Hansen looks at the emergency alert system and why your phone may be key to surviving a disaster.
Oh my God. Oh my God. It was just like a horror show, just standing there on solid ground while full houses floated by with people sitting on top, like screaming for their lives.
Zoe Dadian's front yard became a front line in the most catastrophic disaster to ever hit her.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis speaking in St. Petersburg, Florida, on recovery efforts underway. Let's listen.
Been deployed 10 swift water teams. The state and local collaborations, over 1,600 individuals have been rescued, over 140 animals from floodwaters, rubble, or other hazards. So I want to thank everybody who is doing that. You know, as soon as that storm passes, it's still hazardous, but it's at least somewhat safe. They go out and they get the job done. It's made a big difference. Florida National Guard, Florida law enforcement, state urban search and rescue teams continue to work. We still have working right now 31 rescue aircraft, 500 high-wheeled tactical vehicles, and over a dozen boats on various missions. We had Florida ambulance teams. We were talking about how we were staging all these ambulances. They assisted in the evacuation of over 200 patients from a hospital that was experiencing flooding. And then there was a lot of nursing homes and hospitals that were pre-evacuated to safety. I know I was speaking with folks from nursing homes about how much better that process has gone than in the past. Power restoration. So the storm left, the outer bands of the storm left the state yesterday afternoon, and yet you already have 1.6 million accounts have been restored in the state of Florida. 2.4 million as of 9 a.m. are outstanding. And as I said, you're going to hear from Melissa from Duke about the progress being made in Pinellas County. We know there's a lot of out in Hillsborough with TECO, and then throughout the balance of the state, you've got about 667,000 out of FPL, but my understanding is that even where the storm made landfall, like Sarasota, there wasn't as much damage to the power infrastructure. So I think you're going to see some progress there as well. And then we've got about 260,000 with the co-ops and about 100,000 with the munis in various parts of the state. But, you know, they also pre-staged, the co-ops pre-staged. So we had the 50+ thousand linemen. You know, that wasn't just Duke and FPL and kind of the powerhouse companies. You did have the munis. You had they brought in thousands of extra linemen, and the co-ops brought in 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 extra linemen. Pinellas missions. So we have provided, or in the process of providing, 8 light towers, 2 message boards, and 2 forklifts, thousands of bottles of water for Baptist Field Kitchen, 16 bypass pumps needed to pump wastewater at lift stations damaged by the storm, and then thousands of liters of water delivered to Campbell Park Elementary to ensure water availability for the sheltered residents and staff. And then on the debris removal, we started this weekend with emergency debris operations. We demanded 24/7 landfill access, and we took all of our trucks that are involved for the Florida Department of Transportation. They're building roads. They're doing normal work that they're supposed to do. That was paused. All those resources were surged, mostly to Pinellas, but also to the barrier islands of Manatee and Sarasota. And in about a 72-hour period, our state guys were able to do 2,200 truckloads of debris from Pinellas County barrier islands. And that's over 40,000 cubic yards of debris that was removed. And I don't think there's ever been that much debris removed in such a short period of time. So I want to thank those folks from those state agencies. We also had some of our road contractors who, because the storm was coming, they were probably going to have to stop road building anyways. And so we transitioned them to help with the debris. So it was really a team effort. But those guys we had shifts working round the clock. And you had in the wee hours of the morning, as Milton was expected to make landfall later that day, you still had this debris operation going. So that made a huge difference, and it definitely mitigated some of the damages. We also immediately started doing cut and toss operations as soon as it was safe. 12,000 miles of state roads have been cleared, and that's 96% complete. And in less than 12 hours, 158 bridge inspectors have conducted nearly 2,000 bridge inspections across the impacted areas. I-4, I-75, I-95, and Alligator Alley are cleared and open. Sunshine Skyway, Gandy, Howard Franklin, Courtney Campbell have been inspected, cleared, and are open. Commercial airports, Daytona, Lakeland, Melbourne, Orlando, Sanford, Palm Beach, Punta Gorda, Southwest Florida, Tampa International, and Vero Beach are all open. Sarasota, Bradenton is expected to reopen at 0600 tomorrow, and St. Pete Clearwater Airport is expected to resume today at 1600. We are helping them with pumps to send so that they're able to get up online later this afternoon. Port Tampa Bay and Seaport Manatee have reopened with some restrictions. Channel assessments are currently underway at both of them, and I know Kevin is working with the utilities and the port, particularly in Tampa, to get the power restored so that they can resume full operations. Port Canaveral and Jacksport are both open. Landslide are expected to open waterside later today. 19 school districts that were closed yesterday have reopened today. There are at least 7 other school districts opening on Monday, and I bet you will hear more districts announce reopenings for Monday, given, thankfully, I think most of them had either no or very minimal damage. For parents who want information on your school district, you can go to fldoe.org/storminfo. That's the Florida Department of Education website, fldoe.org/storminfo. Fatalities. Now, we had 5 fatalities with that tornado in St. Lucie, and that's a very tragic thing. I don't think that these are things with the tornadoes. They come. It is very hard to prepare. You got to just take cover and hope for the best. So we have had fatalities of that nature. But what we are also seeing is we're now in the period where you have fatalities that are preventable. We have had fatalities because of interaction with downed power lines and water. We are seeing hazards that are still there. So please exercise caution. Don't wade into floodwaters. Be careful with how you're using ladders. Use generators properly. Make sure it's outside your home. Don't run that generator inside. So we are now in the situation where everything has been stabilized. And so you have to make the proper decisions and just know that there are still some hazards out there. We see debris. Probably not as much debris, quite frankly, as I anticipated 48 hours ago when you were looking at what the storm was doing, but you have a lot of debris. If you have debris interacting with power lines, don't mess with it. People will come and be able to get that handled. So please exercise caution. If you need assistance.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis there speaking from St. Petersburg, Florida, acknowledging that some of the deaths are from the aftermath of the storm, with people either interacting with downed power lines or suffering in some of the floodwaters, which are widespread. We'll continue listening in to this. That does it for me. I'm Errol Barnett at the Broadcast Center in New York. I'll see you on CBS Mornings Saturday, but stay right where you are. Elizabeth Cook picks things up from San Francisco next.